Okay. This is the thing for a first shleima for anyone specific, guys, that you'd like to dedicate this to. I've got my friend's gran, who is very ill at the moment, Rachel Bat Sarah Freidel. She's in the Beit Pratia, where Arthur sometimes works. That's my friend's grandmother. Okay, let's continue. Okay, we were discussing Eov, Job, the man who suffered greatly, but managed to still keep his sanity and his emunah. And it says here. Okay, here we go. Friendship is a complete construct, and true friends are rare. To be a friend, requires complete identification with one's fellow and a readiness to make sacrifices on his behalf. A true friend anticipates needs, is sensitive to his friend's difficulties, and rejoices in his friend's success as if it were his own. True friends do not take each other for granted. It is clear that in order to obtain a true and worthy friend and to be a worthy friend, one has to invest a great deal of time and effort. It is a long process, and there are no shortcuts. Words alone do not create true friendships. Empathy and genuine concern, willingness to sacrifice, desire for mutual growth, and true love of the other person are basic ingredients in establishing a true and meaningful friendship. The basis for true friendship is not compassion or mercy. It comes from the ability to identify with another in various situations over an extended period of time. Okay.
All right. Just a couple of the overlying concepts of yesterday is that we use the term 100th because a 100th is minuscule. It's a percent. We learned that if you've got like 1/60th, Kevin, as far as I remember with kashrut, if you've got a meat pot and 1/60th of the milk fits in, it's still rendered kosher. There's even a lenient opinion that says if you've got 1 out of 3 chickens that's treif, then you can consider it kosher because the majority are kosher. But that's
1 out of 3. You mean 2 out of 3?
No. I'm saying 1 out of 3 is treif, 2 out of 3 is kosher. So the majority are kosher.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I didn't. Okay, so yes.
I'm saying, but that's I think when one is really hard pressed, or it might be essential, or I can't imagine that being the general.
A pressing need.
Rule, yeah. Is that your friend?
Yeah. Sorry, can I just?
Sure.
Sorry about this, guys.
So Damon, that might be a way out. 2 out of 3 are kosher, all 3 out of 3. So you marry 2 Jewish girls and 1 goy.
Yeah, listen, we wouldn't have to marry the goy if we could find 1 Jewish girl.
That's true. We can't find those 2. I never really thought it through.
But I appreciate your empathy. Your empathy gets 10 out of 10, as Kevin said, for friendship. So
I'm just looking for loopholes. It is empathy, but it's also I'm big into loopholes.
Yeah, me too.
My middle name.
My middle name is why do I keep making the same mistakes again and again? Long middle name.
Oh, that used to be mine, and then I changed it. I had to go to the what's it called? Home Affairs to change it.
Yeah.
That one for years.
I think Kevin's still on the phone.
He's off. You can start.
I don't know.
Is he on the phone?
Yeah, he's on the phone.
Oh, he's still on the phone. Yeah, right.
I'm off the phone now. You can start.
Okie dokie. So we're saying that 100th is minuscule. So if you're leaving out something of 100th of the animal that you stole and wish to sell, then that's a tiny amount. But the exclusion of even that 100th causes the thief to be exempt from the 4- or 5-fold penalty because he failed to sell the entire animal. because the pasuk says if you slaughter it or sell it, meaning that the word it means either in its entirety. That's the definition. So we also learned a case in previous brises about can you pay half penalties? I mean, it obviously came out from the pasuk you can, but that was still when you were stealing a full amount, liable to both partners. So that had some slightly different implications. But the bottom line is, if we carry on in terms of our daf, there's two basic majority opinions. The first opinion is Rav, who said that, look, something that becomes permitted with it through shchita, if you left that out, you basically have left out something substantial, which means any part of the flesh that's eligible to be consumed from a kashrut point of view, you leave that out, you haven't sold the whole animal. And therefore, even if it's a tiny amount of that, there's an exemption for the 4 or 5-fold payment. Levi goes with the Tana Kamma opinion, who says that the thief is exempt, even if he sold it with the exception of its shearings, which Gavin said is very, very lenient, because shearings itself aren't even a substantial part of the animal, it's just the external wool. But be that as it may, these are pretty much the spectrum of opinions. We do know that the opinions were more strict as far as Rebbe is concerned, because Rebbe said if the thief sold it with the exception of something that is essential for the shchita itself, he does not pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. So what does that mean? Is that if he excluded from the organ, from the sale, an organ, right? But when we said an organ, that organ has to invalidate the slaughter, and like a nevela. So when it's still alive. So what we are saying is here, it's certainly not such an issue. He'd have to exclude the organ like the liver or the esophagus or the trachea, or one of the intestines, the thigh or its lung cavity, etc. That's in the 21st daf of Chulin, to make it nevela, which means you can't slaughter it. But then Kevin asked a great question. He said, look, what happens with the treifa where you can't get benefit? And Kevin's right. You still can't pay the penalty on that. So whether it gives the animal a death sentence or just means that you can't do proper shchita, either way, it's in the same category, Kevin. So that was well spotted. We do say that Rav initially said that if you withhold only the hide, its horns, or its wool, anything that isn't edible, he hasn't made a valid exclusion, and therefore the thief is liable to the 4 or 5-fold payment, as Rashi concurs. What we also said is that it was taught in the brisa, if the thief sold it with the exception of its shearings, he is exempt from the 4 or 5-fold payment. So that's the view. The brisa is the view of the Tana Kamma, and obviously Levi accords with the Tana Kamma. So it is the most lenient. Rebbe is seems to be quite stringent here. Okay. Now, if Rebbe is saying, but if you sold it with the exception of something that's not essential for shchita, then, for example, he excluded a foreleg or hind leg below the knee, it doesn't render the animal treifa either, and therefore there's the 4 or 5-fold eligibility. Now, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, if the thief sold it with the exception of its horn, he does not pay the 4 or 5-fold payment, okay? Because, in other words, he's more strict than Rav, because the horn is something you can't consume. We should actually say he's not more strict than Rav, he's actually more lenient than Rav. Because Rav
is one level lenient.
Is one more level lenient, because he's saying that there is no eligibility to the 4 or 5-fold payment if you left off its horn. So he's one step lenient. But if he sold it with the exception of its shearings, he does pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. So he's more strict than Levi and the Tana Kamma, Rav Shimon ben Elazar. but he's more lenient than Rav, who says that only the meat is something that would exempt the thief. And he's far more lenient than Rebbe, who says that it's only an essential organ that would create a nevela, where you can't even slaughter the animal. So the Gemara says there's no issue as far as Levi is concerned because it accords with the Bava Kamma. But according to Rav, there's a problem because who does his interpretation accord with? So the Gemara says they say Rav stated his ruling in accordance with this Tana, for it was taught in a brisa. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, if he sold the animal with the exception of its foreleg or with the exception of its hind leg, he does not pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. Now, so far, that, as we said before the other day, that definitely accords with Rav. Okay? The problem is the part, if he sold it with the exception of its horn, with the exception of his shearing, he does pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. Now, as far as that's concerned, that also does cover Rav. So what happens is you're saying, well, isn't this a contradiction of the other day? Is that we learn two different brises. Let me just say to you as follows. This is the second brisa. So the first brisa that we learn is also by Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and this is also by Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, but they're a contradiction. Listen carefully. The first brisa says, if the thief sold the stolen animal with the exception of its foreleg, or with the exception of its hind leg, with the exception of its horns, or with the exceptions of the shearings, he does not pay the 4 or 5-fold payment, which has a problem for Rav, because Rav doesn't count the horn or the shearings as something to exempt the thief from the 4 or 5-fold payment. Now, there's a second version of Rav Shimon ben Elazar, who says if he sold the animal with the exception of its foreleg or the exception of its hind leg, he does not pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. So far we said that that's according to Rav. But this second brisa continues and says, if the thief sold with the exception of its horn, with the exceptions of the shearings, he pays the 4 or 5-fold payment because it's not significant enough to exempt him. So according to the second version of the brisa, we see that the exclusion of the portion of the animal containing flesh exempts the thief, which goes with Rav. But according to the first brisa, the exemption of the horn and the shearings would exempt the thief as well, which is not according to Rav. So how can Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar have the same brisa? Because the Gemara says, well, it's contradictory. Because the Gemara answers, look, there's two Tanaic opinions presenting Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's opinion separately. There are two versions of it. That's the bottom line. So the first thing of it is, look, the Gemara wants to know what's the reason between each Tanaic opinion. In other words, in what issues do they disagree? Because the Bava Kamma holds that we require the fulfillment of the verse, and he slaughters it, which implies the entirety of it, and we require the fulfillment of the verse, or he sells it, which implies the entirety of it. So, guys, as far as the rabbinic opinion in Levi is concerned, is that we have a juxtaposition of the verse, and he slaughters it, and he sells it, which means whatever prevents you from consuming it from the slaughter, like, for example, would make the animal treifa or nevela, and therefore you wouldn't be able to consume it, you don't have to pay the penalty if you sell it. The two are indeed very linked. Okay? So therefore, if he excludes any part of the animal from the sale, even an extraneous portion such as the shearings, he's not liable to the penalty. So the Bava Kamma takes it a step further, which means that if you, according to that version saying the word "it" means the entirety of the animal, it would even exclude from liability if you left off the animal's shearings. But that's also where Rebbe becomes more stringent, because he says the verse doesn't just say the word "it" in its entirety. It uses the word "he slaughters it," which obviously refers to an animal that is halachically subject to slaughter. to the exclusion of an animal that is not halachically subject to slaughter. So anything that would prevent the animal from being fit to be eaten, like if it was missing an organ, means its slaughter is meaningless from a halachic perspective. You can't eat it and you can't sell it. And since the Torah states, and he slaughters it or he sells it, implies that his liability when he sells it is comparable to his liability when slaughtering it. So the Gemara says, just as the thief is not liable to the penalty for slaughtering if the animal is missing an essential part of its body, so too is not liable to the penalty for selling it if he excludes an essential part of its body from the sale. However, is liable to the penalty if he merely excludes a part of the body that is not essential. Okay, so we've learned about the different opinions in which rabbis are saying that there's a part that's essential and not essential. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar agrees with the Tana Kamma that in the first brisa, and basically excludes any non-essential part of the body as well as essential animals. In other words, anything that you've left out means you're not selling the entirety of the animal. Okay, but the second part of the brisa, which is from a different Tanaic explanation of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, with respect to the horn, he holds that it doesn't stand to be cut off. So therefore, since cutting the horn off basically constitutes an exclusion part of the animal itself. So therefore, if the thief excludes it, he doesn't pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. But as far as the animal shearings, which stands to be cut off without damaging the animal or hurting the animal in any way, that exclusion from the sale doesn't constitute an essential exclusion, because it's actually not part of the animal itself, it's the coat. And therefore, even if the thief excludes it, he pays the 4 or 5-fold payment. So it's a little bit more subtle, because Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, even according to that opinion where there is liability, especially in the second brisa, says that as far as the shearings are concerned with the second brisa, there's no payment for the shearings, whereas the first brisa says it there is. Okay. Okay. So then, what it teaches is as follows. There's another Tana of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's Academy who quoted his opinion in the second brisa, and he holds that if you take with respect to the animal's foreleg or hind leg, we're talking, Kevin, as Kevin asked, when you remove the sciatic nerve. So in those days, they knew how to do it. So the hind leg was kosher. And remember, it was kosher, it was from below the knee. Because if it's above the knee, it's a nevela. So that automatically cancels the animal out. But it's below the knee. So as far as that's concerned, with respect to the animal's foreleg or hind leg, which requires slaughter in order for the flesh to be permissible, if you do it above the knee, okay, it constitutes a meaningful exclusion. And therefore, if the thief excluded one of them, he doesn't have to pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. So that's above the knee. But as far as the horns and the shearings are concerned, that doesn't require slaughter, because it's not fit for consumption. Nobody's going to eat the shearings. You're going to wear the shearings. And the horn is used maybe for a shofar or whatever, but it's not consumed. And therefore, according to the second explanation of the Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, it's not an essential commodity, so that if it's left off from the sale, it doesn't constitute a meaningful exclusion. So the thief then would be liable to the 4 or 5-fold payment. Okay, so we've already learned that the contradiction is because they're two different Tanaic opinions of Rav Shimon ben Elazar. So the first, one of the opinions states as follows: the rabbis taught in a brisa, one who steals an amputated animal, a lame one or a blind one, and then slaughters or sells it, also too, one who steals an animal of partners and slaughters or sells it is liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. So what we are saying is here is if you steal an animal and it's a Stevie Wonder animal, or if it's a Helen Keller crippled animal, whatever the case may be, if you stole it in that condition and you sold it in that condition, you're selling the animal in its entirety, because that's the condition that you stole it in. It's not as if you are only selling part of the animal you stole. How they would determine it, I don't know, because let me just tell you what my problem with it is. If I'm the owner and somebody steals it from me, I'm not going to go in front of the courtroom and say, no, Your Honor, this was a blind, deaf, mute, lame, or whatever animal, and therefore he sold it in its entirety. But I probably would, because it means that then if there's eligibility for a 4 or 5-fold payment, I just thought about it. They would then go to the original owner, and he would say, no, I sold the one-legged wonder. I owned a one-legged wonder, and it was stolen from me. So the original owner could lie in order to get a 4 or 5-fold payment, Gavin. That's what I thought about. But the thief deserves that. It's not the end of the world, unless he'd have to take an oath, the original owner. That probably would make him take an oath, because he wouldn't want to use Hashem's name in vain. Do you get what I'm saying? So providing the thief never hacked it off, he's eligible for the 4 or 5-fold payment. But as Gavin said yesterday, well, surely the thief should just hack it off. Then he doesn't ever have to pay a penalty. And even according to the Bava Kamma, all he would have to do is shave off its fur, get a nice fur coat, or what do you call it, a woolen coat, sell the animal not being cured for more than double. So Gavin, I agree with you. It's difficult to understand. It really, really is. I don't get it either. But let's just learn it according to the way it is. So now it's saying that if you inherit an animal, well, not if you inherit, if you steal an animal in that lame state and you sell it, you've sold the animal in entirety in the condition that you found it. But it's saying now, in the same verse, one who steals an animal of partners and slaughters or sells it, this is what we touched on yesterday, is liable to the 4 or 5-fold payment. Okay? But partners who stole an animal and then slaughtered or sold it are exempt from the 4 or 5-fold payment. So, the Gemara asked, but it was taught in another brisa, partners who stole an animal and then slaughtered or sold it are liable to the 4 or 5-fold payment. Okay? So the Gemara says here, look, Rav Nachman's opinion is as follows. There actually isn't a difficulty between the brisa and the statement in the Mishnah. Because in the brisa that exempts partners, we're dealing with a partner who stole from his fellow partner. So what actually it means is that in that case, I own 50% and Kevin owns 50%. And if I stole Kevin's 50%, I'm not stealing the animal in its entirety, because Kevin only owns 50%. I own the other 50%. And therefore, all I paid to Kevin is double what I stole, not the 4 or 5-fold. Because we're partners, Kevin. In order for me to be eligible for the 4 or 5-fold, I have to steal the animal that you own in its entirety. If I'm only stealing half your animal because I'm partners with you and I've got half the animal, I don't owe you a 4 or 5-fold payment, but I do owe you double, because what you steal, you shall pay double. However, if you have Shimon and Levi, or Shimon and Reuven, and they're brothers, and the one brother stole from the other, he never stole it totally in lawlessness because he's got half a share. He doesn't pay the 4 or 5-fold to his brother, and he only pays the principal back because there's no penalty with regards to inheritance from the father. We learned that. So if you steal from your business partner, you don't pay the 4 or 5-fold because he doesn't own the animal in its entirety, and you're not fulfilling the pasuk, and you slaughter or sell it in its entirety. Or you're not slaughtering it or selling it, which implies in its entirety. So therefore, the thief that steals, the business partner that steals from his partner only pays the 2-fold payment. Okay? But we're saying when is there liability to 4 or 5-fold payment? Is when there are two thieves that are business partners that steal from an innocent victim. Okay? That's when they're liable to the 4 or 5-fold payment according to Rav Nachman. So he says that in the brisa that holds partners liable, we are dealing with a partner who stole from elsewhere together with his fellow. Two compadres in crime, can think of it. So what we are saying is here that there seems to be a problem because Rava is challenging Rav Nachman on the basis of the following brisa. It might be thought that a partner who stole an animal from his fellow partner, or partners who stole an animal together, are liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment if they slaughter or sell it. The Torah therefore states, and he slaughters it, which implies that we require that he slaughter the entirety of it lawlessly in order for him to become liable to the penalty. And this is lacking here. So Rava is bringing a brisa that challenges, well, it agrees with Rav Nachman on one front and challenges him on another. It agrees with him that, look, if you steal from your business partner doesn't own the full share, therefore there's no four or fivefold liability, because it says when you slaughter it or sell it, it means the whole animal. You're entitled to half the share, therefore it's not in lawlessness. But where Rava is disagreeing with Rav Nachman is he says, listen, when they're two business partners, you've also got the same problem. Why have you got the same problem? As Gavin said yesterday, is because neither one of the thieves owns it in its entirety. And therefore, if one of the thieves steals the animal and then slaughters it, or steals the animal and then sells it, or steals it, slaughters it, and sells it, doesn't matter whatever combination you do, there's no four or fivefold penalty because he's only owned half the item as a thief. And he has to own the entire item in order to be eligible for a four or fivefold payment if he sells the full animal to somebody else, but not if he's only got a 50% share in that animal. So what Rava is saying is it doesn't make a difference if you're a lawful partner or a lawless partner. If you don't have the entire part of the animal, there's a problem. There's no eligibility for a four or fivefold payment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, it's fairly clear.
I'm just waiting for this guy. Sorry, just say it again. So you're saying they're two thieves. They joined thieves in stealing the animal. Is that what you said?
Yeah, not in selling. Yes, in
stealing.
Stealing and then selling. Correct. So what we're saying is...
So they're actually partners in a warped way.
Yes. If you and I take an animal from Gavin, right? And you sell your share and I sell my share, we don't have to pay a four or fivefold penalty because we're not selling the entirety of the animal ourselves. You only selling 50% of the animal, and I, as your thief's partner, is selling 50% of the animal, and therefore we're not selling the animal as what. In other words, it's not one person selling the animal in its entirety. I don't own the full animal. We're partners in thieves. So therefore, we don't pay the four or fivefold penalty. So if you're prepared to work with partners, and the moral of the story is if you steal from them and you sell from them, or you've got a business partner that's a thief, and you sell it together with him, there's no eligibility for a four or fivefold payment. So cooperation is magic. Okay. I'm not advocating it. I'm just saying that that's the way to get off the hook.
I think someone's at the door. Can you hold? Let me just double that check.
So partnerships in a business makes no sense in a legitimate business, but in a thieving business, it makes absolute sense.
Except if you ever watched any of these mafia movies.
Sorry, not false alarm. Probably in the next 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. Okay.
A true story with the Lufthansa Heart, with the Lucchese and Banana crime families, is that you had Jimmy Burke. I'm not kidding. That basically did the Lufthansa Heart. It was the biggest
heist or height.
It was the heist. Sorry, it was the biggest.
The Bonanno and the Lucchese.
Yeah, but I mean, Jimmy Burke was an Irishman, but he actually organized it, and it was the biggest heist off JFK Airport, I think, in its history. In the 70s, he just killed all his partners. So believe me, when there's no moral compass, I wouldn't recommend having partners as thieves, because if they're thieves, they're probably murderers, and the life expectancy is rather short. So just thought I'd add that caveat. So
it was a great example. Thank you.
Rav Nachman concedes and therefore suggests a different resolution to the contradiction, because he hears where Rav's coming from and he agrees. Rather, Rav Nachman said, both brises deal with partners who stole from elsewhere, and nevertheless there's no difficulty. Here in the brisa that holds partners liable, we are dealing with a partner who slaughtered the stolen animal with his fellow's consent, whereas here in the brisa that exempts partners, we are dealing with a partner who slaughtered the stolen animal without his partner's consent. So what he's basically saying is that if the two partners are in cahoots with each other, it's as if they're working and operating as one business cooperative, and therefore their eligibility for the 4 or 5-fold payment is there. Because it doesn't matter if the one thief says, no, he hired an agent to steal from him, because generally there can be no agency through transgression, which means the person can say, well, I asked him to steal, but Hashem told him not to steal. Why did he listen to me? He's responsible himself. I'm not responsible. But the pasuk teaches the word. 5 cattle shall he pay instead of the ox. But because the pasuk could have said, Arthur, 5 cattle shall he pay for the ox, meaning that if you steal 1 ox, you pay 5 ox. The very fact that it uses the word instead, superfluous, means that this is an exception to that rule, that you can incur liability for somebody that you hire as an agent with regards to theft. That's one of the... So in other words, you can't say the thief did it, I'm not liable for the 4 or 5-fold payment, and hang him to dry. The minute it's an arrangement where you have another thief as your agent, or alternatively, you have a partnership, it's as though you did it with one mind. It's not like one thief that stole from another, because then the second thief, we learn, never stole it from the house of the man. And since he didn't steal it from the house of the man, the original owner, there's no eligibility for the second thief to pay the 4 or 5-fold penalty. Okay. But what we're also saying is here is that what you've got to look at is he's not acting as his partner's agent, so the crime of stealing an animal and slaughtering it was committed only upon his half of the animal. But what we are saying here is that there is this case of, just like as when a seller steals and sells an animal, he has to have a buy in order that the transaction functions. So you need 2 parties. So the word instead is coming to tell you that when you slaughter, if you have another partner, it's as though you need a buyer and a seller, is that both are complicit in the act. So you don't have, there can be no agency through transgression. In other words, Kevin, I steal an animal from you and I sell it to Gavin. Without Gavin being able to buy it, I can't sell it. Therefore, Gavin and I are both complicit to a certain degree. Okay? So just like if I steal an animal and somebody else is involved in the theft on the slaughter basis or even the selling basis, the other partner is also complicit, providing that he's not doing it under my nose, meaning he's not snaking me. But who's to say, Gavin, that thieves can't blame each other when the heat gets tough and say, yeah, originally we were going to work together as partners, but he stole it and he sold it under my nose. He sold it under my nose. We were meant to share. And therefore, it's his fault. He must pay the 5-fold penalty. At which case, he wouldn't pay the 5-fold penalty because he stole it from the thief. But if we were working together, we're both eligible to pay the 5-fold penalty. So my question is, why don't thieves lie under oath? If they steal,
because they know the consequences of lying, and that's very serious.
Is the serious consequences if they're fearful of Hashem and they don't want to take an oath in vain. That is a big deal. Maybe they have got a good conscience, and we're hoping for that. But generally, Hashem says, "Don't steal." So how afraid of Hashem can they be? That's exactly why they pay the 4 or 5-fold, because they're more afraid of people's opinion than Hashem. So I don't know how it would work in reality. I'm not sure.
You said earlier, if one of the thieves, one of the partners sells or slaughters the animal, remember we did something just about at least a year and a half ago where there were partners and one partner did something and the other didn't. Remember we did? Do you remember?
Yeah.
Does this have any link? Is this related to it?
Yeah, we've done it quite a few times in different scenarios. The most recent time we did it was if one partner stole from another partner, if one son stole from his father's inheritance, if one
that's
son
right.
stole after his father's, if his father was alive versus if his father was dead, and we said if his father was dead, he inherits a share, therefore he doesn't owe the full
can't pay the full payment because he's one of the shareholders.
So only pays the principal to his brothers, but with business partners, there is a double payment because there can be no penalty with brothers, with the inheritance. So we did learn things similar to that. And we did learn quite a while ago if there were partners that owned an ox and they damaged another ox, and there were 3 or 4 partners, who's liable? We did, and there was 1/4 liability, 1/3. You remember all of that? Yeah. So, guys, I don't want to hit on anything more, but I think we've done this quite nicely.
Sorry, thanks for the delay. Sorry, guys.
Pleasure, guys. Let's end now.
At least we managed to almost have this uninterrupted share. Okay, cheers. Here we go. He's just arrived. Good timing, Damon.
Good. All right, guys. Have a good evening. Thanks.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Thank you.